Here it comes, folks. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh! Oh my goodness.
I wonder if that axe has got a sliding compound miter feature. Welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. Today we're going to take a look at a couple of saws, both a miter saw and a chop saw. These are made by a lesser known brand that I think is worth taking a look at. So let's not waste any time and dig into these saws. So I'm guessing you probably haven't heard of this brand, as I hadn't heard of it until I received these products from the company. And this brand is called Evolution Power Tools, and this is a British-based company that does most of their manufacturing out of China.
Oh, behave.
And in full disclosure, both of these saws, as well as the accessory we're going to take a look at, were gifted to me by the company. But since this channel loves to highlight lesser known tool brands, this is a perfect opportunity to check this brand out. And as I said earlier, we're going to be looking at two saws as well as a saw accessory. But before we look at these tools, let's take a look at what I'm working with right now. So right outside my shop is my DeWalt miter saw, and this is the second miter saw that I ever purchased. The first one was this Ryobi miter saw, and I outgrew that rather quickly. And I eventually sold that Ryobi, but this is one that I'm never going to get rid of. I'm essentially using this as a chop saw for any material that I'm afraid to use on my other miter saw. And a lot of people use the phrase chop saw interchangeably with miter saw, but a chop saw is really meant to be used with metal only. And along with using this miter saw as a job site miter saw, taking it with me wherever I need it, I also use this to cut through metal. Soft metals, that is, like aluminum and brass. Whenever I go to cut through wood, however, I go to my primary miter saw. And my primary miter saw is my Festool Capex. This has been a game changer for me for precision and accuracy whenever I'm cutting through wood. But I really don't like using that Capex for cutting through any material other than wood, so that's why I have that DeWalt miter saw right outside my shop. But even that DeWalt still has its limitations, and that's why I'm super excited to take a look at these two new saws from Evolution. So what tools are we going to check out today? Well, let's go take a look. So the three items that we're going to take a look at today are the Evolution miter stand, as well as the 14-inch chop saw. And lastly, we'll take a look at the 8 1/4 compound miter saw. So let's first test out that miter saw stand. Before we dig into this box, I wanted to first talk about the extremely reasonable price of this stand. It's just over $100, which is really cheap compared to a lot of stands, especially my Festool. Now obviously the Evolution stand isn't going to have all the bells and whistles of the Festool miter stand, but it is a lot cheaper. The Festool is now retailing for about $1,000. And my first miter stand didn't have any bells and whistles either, as I made it from construction lumber from Home Depot. And at today's lumber prices, that stand probably would have cost well over $100 anyway. So let me get this thing out of the box and let's see what comes with it. So first off is the base of the stand, and this thing feels very well built and screams high quality.
And that's what I call high quality.
The nice thing about this is it's foldable, and by pressing the notch you can simply slide the legs into place. And the entire base came fully assembled, which is really nice because you can tell a lot of these pieces have been welded together. If we look at the other items that come in the box, you can see there's not a whole lot of pieces. There's the instructions along with a couple of mounting brackets that allow you to attach the roller arms. There's also some tightening knobs and some hardware so that you can attach your saw to the base. To install the rollers, you'll simply slide out one of the arms and place the mounting bracket right on top of that arm. Then you can lock it into place with the locking screw on the very bottom. With the mounting bracket installed, you can simply take one of the rollers and slide it into place and lock it down with the opposite knob.
Rollers. Oh, yep.
Once you've done that, you'll repeat the process on the other side. With everything installed on this miter stand, this thing is rock solid once you tighten down those screws. And in fact, the only play I get with these arms is the flexing of the arm itself. The last few items in the box are the mounting brackets that you attach your saw to with the included hardware so that you can attach it to the miter station. Once your saw is attached to those brackets, they easily slide into place over the miter station and are locked into place with the attached knob. The next question you're probably asking is, what is the cut capacity with these arms fully extended?
You are a mind reader.
So if I take my tape measure and hook it onto one roller and extend it down, We're looking at total support of just over 75 inches, or 6'3" and some change. And I'll be honest, for just over $100, I'm really impressed with the durability of this unit. This thing is made entirely out of metal except for a couple of knobs on the handles. But we really need to test this thing out, so let's grab a saw and attach it to this miter stand and see how well it holds up. And luckily, we've got a couple of saws to do that with. So let's grab our first saw, unbox it, and see how well it attaches to this miter stand. Before we dig into our first saw, however, I ask you to do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Also, just like with all my videos, I'll leave links in the description below, so if any of these tools interest you, you can go check them out in the description below. Lastly, I've just released my new website, www.flynndogwoodwork.com. That's www.flynndogwoodwork.com. There you can find many of my tool recommendations as well as shop updates and even some fun woodworking accessories, including all the t-shirts that I wear in my videos. So check out my new website, www.flynndogwoodwork.com. Now let's move back to the video. So the saw I'd like to attach to this is the Evolution 14-inch metal cutting chop saw. Let's unbox this and see what comes with it. So once you take this saw out of the box, you can see there's a few more pieces for assembly, but that's okay. This is a much more complicated tool. So let's assemble this and see how well it works. Before we assemble this saw, however, I did want to attach it to that miter saw stand. So let's go grab the two mounting brackets and attach it to the bottom of this saw. So with the saw flipped over, I'm going to take two long bolts and slide them into the mounting bracket. Once they're installed, I can then place them into the two holes on the bottom of the saw. With the bolt slid through the base of the saw, I'll simply take a washer and a nut and tighten down both the front and the back of the bracket. With the nuts tightened down on both sides, I'll repeat the process on the other side of the saw. With both mounting brackets installed, I can now take this over to the miter stand and install the base. So I'll slide those two brackets on top of those two cylinders and lock it into place. Once I have the base installed, I can slide the saw mechanism onto the two rails and back of the saw. With the saw installed, you can now see how easily you can maneuver this saw back and forth. To lock it into place, you'll simply remove this black tab on the very end, and a pin will lock into place on one of the holes in the rails. Next, on the very back of the saw, we'll add the plate that prevents the saw from sliding off the end of the rails. And this can be installed using two hex screws with the onboard hex key located on the back of the saw. Next up, we'll install the clamp bar on the front of the saw. Being a woodworker, this is a feature that I haven't seen in any other miter saw. We'll simply slide the rails into the two notches in the front of the saw. And we can tighten it into place with the two springed hand screws in the very front. Now it's time to install the blade, and this saw comes with a blade that's probably a-okay for us woodworkers.
You're a secret woodworker?
And the blade that comes with this saw is a 14-inch 66-tooth blade, and this is strong enough to go through mild steel. So I'm going to install this blade just like I would with any other miter saw. The only difference is there's a little blade guard in the back that I assume is to prevent sparks from flying everywhere. The only thing left to continue the assembly of this saw are the clamps, and there's a couple of unique ones here that many of us woodworkers may not have seen before. So these are the clamps that are provided to you, and one of them may look very similar, and you probably have one of these on your current miter saw. But there's also two other clamps that look a little different, and these are horizontal clamps. There's also three of these black things, which are kind of interesting. They're made to slide right over the tip of your clamp to give you support for some of those odd-shaped items. The vertical clamp, which we're all familiar with, slides into one of the 5 holes on the back of the fence of the miter saw. The vertical clamp has 3 levels of adjustment. On the very back of the clamp, you can unscrew it to maneuver it up and down. On the very front of the clamp is your standard screw clamp. And then at the very front is a quick release to allow you to maneuver it quickly up and down. Next up, let's talk about the horizontal clamps for this saw. Remember the bar that we installed on the very front of the saw?
I remember that.
Well, this bar is for those clamps. So just like with T-Track, these clamps slide right over that bar. And there's 2 of these so you can really give your workpiece a lot of support. And these clamps really have a pretty unique design. If you look at the very top of the clamp, you'll notice this little piece with ribs on it. These go right over the threads of your clamp, and as you push the clamp forward, they instantly lock into place. You can also screw it tight with a little knob on the end. And with the vertical and horizontal support, you can really get a great grip with any material you're working with. And of course, this is a miter saw.
No, it's not.
So let's go over some of the standard features of this saw. If we look at the handle of the saw, you can see there's a quick release tab that allows you to maneuver it to any angle you want. Once you have that desired angle, you twist the knob on the very end. And just like with miter saws, this chop saw has positive stops at your most commonly used angles. That being your 0, your 15, your 22.5, your 30, and 45. So let's make a couple of cuts on this chop saw on some materials that I don't necessarily like to make over at my miter saw. The first material I'd like to cut through is this PVC pipe. Now I'm not necessarily afraid to make cuts on PVC pipe over at the miter saw, but I don't like to make cuts on round material. And that's exactly why I'm going to use these footers that come with the clamps for this chop saw. So I'll slide these footers both over the horizontal and vertical clamps. Then with all my clamps firmly engaged with this round material, I should be able to make this cut very easily and safely. And here you can see how squarely that cut was made without any movement on either side of the pipe.
Pretty square.
Although it's a little bit laughable, next up let's try some bronze, as this is some real material that I'll use for inlays in the future. And I don't want to waste this material, as this is some stuff that I'll use in the future, but I did want to show how it will cut through metal. You'll notice that I did take the footer off this vertical clamp. Now obviously this piece of metal is a little too small for this saw, but you can see how crisp and clean that cut was. And just for shits and giggles, let's combine the two and cut through a piece of 1/2-inch steel pipe.
It's a really shit gig.
And here you'll notice I've once again added the feet to the clamp, so let's cut through this and see how well this does. And if we look at the end of that pipe, you can see how clean that cut is. You can almost see your reflection. So I'm pretty impressed with this chop saw. It's nice having a saw where I don't have to worry about my woodworking blades and getting them all dulled up by chopping through things like aluminum, brass, and even steel. But if you remember, the whole point of setting up this chop saw was to test out the miter station. So how did this miter station do? Well, surprisingly, it did the job, but this is way too big of a miter saw for this miter station. Let me show you why that is. If we look at the frame of the miter station, you can see that the chop saw has completely maxed out the capacity of the station. If we look at the chop saw, you can see the majority of the weight is on this side of the station, causing the entire station to tilt just a little bit this way. But there is a fix for this. If we look down the center of the mounting bracket, you can see there's a tiny screw that allows you to tighten that bracket onto the frame of the miter station. With a couple of turns of that screw, I was able to get this chop saw firmly attached to that miter station and get it all leveled out, which is pretty impressive given the size and the weight of this chop saw. Now let's take this chop saw off and disassemble the miter station so that you can see how it can be put away for storage. And this really is an easy process. All you really need to do is to undo the two knobs on the side. Once those knobs are loose, you simply lift up on the chop saw and place it to the side. Then you simply twist the knob and close both arms and fold all the legs into place. With everything cinched all together, you can place it into storage for later use.
It was a cinch.
So now that we've taken a look at our first two evolution items, let's take a look at our last item, which is the 8 1/4 compound miter saw. Now this may be one of the smallest miter saws you've ever seen, which is one of the features that I really like about this saw. Typically, when I need to do a home improvement project and I need a miter saw, this is the saw I grab. The problem is this thing is really heavy. I'm guessing about 50 pounds. But this little guy is just a fraction of that weight. So let's unbox this and take a closer look. If I had one adjective to describe this miter saw, I'd say
Cute.
But cute isn't what we're looking for. We're looking for a tool that can get the job done. So first and foremost, we need to talk about its cutting capacity, and it appears that this has a cutting capacity of approximately 4.5 inches, which is ideal because we at least want to be able to cut through a 2x4. Next up, let's take a look at the depth we can cut, and it appears that we can cut just under 3 inches with this saw, which is once again plenty of capacity to cut through a 2x4. And if we look at the manual, you can see that the exact cutting capacity is 4 15/16 of an inch by 2 3/16 of an inch. So now that we know the dimensions of the wood we can cut with this tool, let's take a look at some of its features. First off, you'll notice that the gauge on this saw is over on the right-hand side, and this thing has positive stops at 0, 15 degrees, 22.5, 30, as well as 45. And the saw is able to rotate 45 degrees on both sides, giving it a full 90 degrees rotation. Once you're happy with the angle you're at, you can lock it into place with this little knob in the back. The saw also comes with a vertical clamp to hold your workpiece into place. And this clamp can be placed on either side of the saw depending on where you're making your cut. And you'll notice the jaw of the clamp is faceted on both sides in case you're dealing with some oddly shaped items. The saw also allows you to extend the fence on the left-hand side in case you're looking for a little bit more support. By loosening the knob in the back, you can extend the fence by approximately 4 inches. If you remember from earlier, I also said this is a compound miter saw. Let's take a look at how that works. If we look at the back of the saw, you can see there's a tiny knob that you can loosen up. This allows you to rotate the saw left and right. And at the very base of the saw, you'll also notice the gauge that gives you the measurement of your angles. Lastly, if you're looking for dust collection, it does come with a bag, but more importantly, you can attach a vacuum to it. Even my favorite festool dust collection fits right into place.
That's fancy. That's fancy.
So I'm going to take a piece of scrap plywood and make a couple of cuts both at 90 and 45 and see how accurate this saw is. So I'll take my piece of scrap wood and cut a 90 on one side and a 45 on the other. And right out of the box, we're pretty accurate here. Let's go grab a delve square and test those angles. So as we slide the square from one side to another, you can see that it's pretty accurate and flush on both sides. But let's test out the compound capabilities by cutting a vertical miter. So here I've got the saw locked in at 90 degrees and 45 degrees on the compound scale. So let's go ahead and make the cut. And if I take my combination square, you can see how accurate that cut was. And frankly, that's about all the functionality that I'd be looking for in a miter saw this size. And honestly, once this miter saw is folded and locked down into place, this is an easy grab-and-go miter saw that only weighs 12 pounds. And this saw can be perfect for those smaller projects or throwing in the back of your car to give your friend a hand anytime they need it. Well, I'm pretty impressed with Evolution Power Tools. This is a brand that I'd never heard of, and I assume you probably haven't either. And I love taking a look at new brands to see if there's any value in any of those less heard of tools. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today on checking out both of these Evolution saws, as well as the Miter Station. I think this is a brand worth taking a look at if you're in the market. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Also, please check out my website, www.flynndogwoodwork.com. There you can find some fun woodworking accessories, some shop updates, as well as some tool recommendations. Until next time, take care as always.